Wilson on the board of the Apalachicola Area Historical Society, and I'd like to welcome you to the last of our spring speaker series. And Robert Seidler is presenting today. I've never met Robert before, but he comes very well recommended. So I think he's probably going to give a great talk. Just a little bit about Robert that I was able to pick up. He's been in Sopchoppy since 1982. He's the proprietor and guide at Buckhorn Creek Lodge in Sopchoppy. He's an outdoors enthusiast, spends a lot of time kayaking, hiking, cycling. He's a former oyster rancher, is what it said on the internet. He's a semi-retired filmmaker. He made 2 nature-based films that were shown on public television. And I think he's going to talk about Sopchoppy's past, present, and future, but I'm not entirely sure. However, let's give him a great big round of applause.
Thank you. I'm glad you're all here. So you have to know how I found Sopchoppy first. I've been a bicyclist forever, and I ride century rides, which are 100 miles. So it was 1982, I'm on a century ride and I'm 60 miles in, and a front comes through. And it's 40 degrees, and we don't know where we're going. We would blank out 100 miles somewhere in this area and just ride. So I get hypothermia, and it's severe. And I roll into Sopchoppy, and the town's frozen in time. I'm frozen in time, and I had to wander around for 3 hours until my wife could get off work, grab the child, and come rescue me, and I fell in love. And that's how it started. The defrosting had begun. So I'm going to take you through, it's a personal journey, but a time and place journey, because, you know, with history, it's kind of, when history comes, it's what's left of the meal. You know, history isn't the whole facts. It's the leftovers that we look, and it's linear when we look at it, and it's never linear when you're experiencing it. So we're going to wander through that time with the Phoenix taking off one morning in Sopchoppy, because whether that was last year or 5,000 years ago, that was an actual cloud formation. And it's like, let's start with timelessness and then get to Sopchoppy with the civilized time. So here we go. I don't know where, this is new. New adventure for me on this one. And that's the spacecraft over Sopchoppy. So if you go back 300 million years, there wasn't a Sopchoppy. And the reason I know this is factual is because I found this oyster shell 150 miles up north of here. And you can pass it around. Ooh. And that is real. And so when you think of that oyster shell, that's history. But when you think of how much calcium was in the ocean then, given the weight of that, it was a whole different ocean. No Sopchoppy yet, but it's coming. So here we are in Florida right now. So I live on a basin in Sopchoppy, which is the Aglockney Basin. And about, God, it's 40 years ago now, I was working in Orlando on a Native American site called Windover, where they found paleo remains of people from 8,000 years ago. And what it had done in being on that site, it changed my mind. It remodeled my whole brain, because these people were making fabric. They were doing stuff as complicated as anybody in the whole world were doing at the time, and nobody knew about it, because in this ecosystem here, everything rots so quickly. So it was in an airtight state in a peat bog, and the 2 professors that discovered it made their whole career out of this. And that's Windover, and you can look it up, and it was very, very profound. So I ended up getting to Sopchoppy, not 20,000 years ago, but 40 years ago. And I look down a lot. I've been looking down my whole life. And so when you look down, you find a lot of things. And there's been a lot of people here You can pass that around. These are things you pick up. There's a lot of pottery. So we fabricate our history presently on about 2% of the evidence that is in front of us. And so that's why you see so many archaeologists and paleontologists, all of a sudden everything changes. And Wendover was one of those times where everything changed after they discovered that site. So here we are in Sopchoppy in the basin, and I came across this, and it was very unsettling. And if you look on the edge of that island, you see those very rough, sharp edges that aren't natural? They're hard edges. You see that tail that spits off to the right? That is a mile-long Native American midden. A mile long. And the people,
Say what a midden is.
it's a trash mound left over from shells and debris, usually from their kitchen or anything. So it's the longest midden I've ever come across. And those hard edges were from a time after, when you saw the other slide, 20,000 years ago, there was a small ice age. The ice age is gone now. This is 15,000 years ago. They migrated from 20 miles out offshore to onshore onto all these islands in the basin. And at the time, all the brown is aquatic grasses. They weren't there. It was all waterways. All the detritus hadn't settled. Nothing had settled in the whole basin. It was all open, and it was full of people. So we'd figured out there was about 600 generations of people out there. And so there's millions of people interned out there, millions and millions of people. And the oddest thing, and I'm only a couple miles from this facility, there's spirits associated with them. And I wish I was kidding, but I'm not kidding. And they visit if you open your mind to them. And so I run my house as an Airbnb, and I get the stories from the people that stay with me. So what happened was the whole state was covered with middens, trash mounds. So the 1920s came, the automobiles came, and 80% of those middens were turned into road base. And this is around Sopchoppy, and that is what's left of the middens. They mixed it with the sand roads so the cars could be enabled. And so 80% of the middens were lost. And so 80% of the history and 80% of everything was lost. And then you get to the 1500s and its history. And you've got the Spanish doing mapping, you've got the French, you've got the English. And this was what they thought Florida was. Just like we think Apalachicola is, or we think Sopchoppy is, everything is still in formation. We're making the history ourselves day by day by day, and many people aren't aware of it because they don't notice it because they're not here long enough. But when you're here generationally, you start taking notice of all the little subtle things that are going on around us. And that's the story of Sopchoppy. And then we're to the 1800s. And there, just imagine being a map maker then, and you can't get 50 feet off the ground, and to pull things like this off. And how detailed everything was. There was a certain elegant brilliance associated with those people. And everybody was stealing everybody else's maps too. So, that was going on. And all the words are changing between the different countries and the dialects and mixed with Indians. So you really don't know. Different maps have different words. And the one that ended up staying the word used, like Sopchoppy, was the one that was easier to produce with your mouth. Like it was Loxachoppy. Well, what would you choose? Loxachoppy or Sopchoppy? So it ended up Sopchoppy, just like that. And they say it's twisted brown water, but nobody really knows for sure where this stuff comes from. But it's history and we accept it. And so much of history we just accept. So we've all looked at globes forever. And we've looked at the Earth. and we think we know everything about how big the countries are. Well, the globes are all wrong. Those are the actual sizes of the countries in real scale. And they did all the globe work for navigation of ships, so they could run straight lines everywhere. And so that's why the countries look bigger and smaller. But in reality, Africa is almost 5 times bigger than the US. But on a globe, it looks about, half the size. So there's all these compromises with history to make things work. And when we start noticing those things, we start seeing new things around us. Like me seeing that island and coming up with these things, you start noticing different as you start noticing different. It scales. So that's downtown Sopchoppy today. It's about 2 square miles. It's pretty tiny. Up to the left, before the train came through, we're going to go. What happened in 1893, there was nothing in Sopchoppy, and one of the residents, there was a train line coming. It was a CT&A coming from South Georgia down to Carabel. And he said, what a great place to have a town right along the river. There's water, there's available cheap land. He bought up a couple of 100 acres, funded a few churches, gave some parcels away, put the rail line through, and essentially Sopchoppy was born. That's the original depot from 1893. And there was a group of us about, now it's almost 30 years ago, formed a 501c3 and just saved it because they were going to bulldoze it. And it doesn't look like much, and it really wasn't much. And a lot of people whined an awful lot about it. But it was saved to be dealt with later. So that was now the rail line has been sold about 7 years later to the GF&A, Georgia, Florida, Alabama rail line. They only held it about 10 years, and they called it the Gopher, Frog, and Alligator, which was absolutely perfectly appropriate. And they had specialty events, and a request having been made for such an excursion, the management of the Carabel, Tallahassee, and Georgia Railroad will place a special train Tuesday, 14th, 1894. All the people along the road may enjoy a dip in the brine and drink in the salt air of the Gulf for $1. A new casino just finished in Carabel. And from what we've gathered, these excursions were quite successful. Wakulla County was essentially obliterated of lumber turn of the last century. And it was sold off for taxes, and that's when Ed Ball and so many others grabbed the land for pennies on the dollar. There was nothing left on it, and it was said to be the only value it had. This is the trestle over Aglockney Bay leaving Sopchoppy. It's still there underwater, and there's some 30-foot by 16 by 16-inch cypress logs underwater still there. That it's just incredible that the stuff is still in existence. So, 40 years ago, I'm wandering in the forest, and I come up on this, and I don't know what it is. And it's in the middle of nowhere. It's about 20 acres with trees growing up through it. Does anybody have a guess?
Sawdust.
Huh?
Sawdust.
Sawdust.
It is. There's two of them in the wildlife, one in the National Forest, one in the Wildlife Refuge, to a scale that is unbelievable in terms of the size of sawdust that's there. And that was mostly when they took the cypress trees. It's mostly cypress sawdust. And so this ended up on private land, and they've been chewing at it with backhoes for 10 years. And the center is steaming.
You can smell it.
Yeah, you can smell it. You can smell the cedar cypress smell. So that the scale of what they did is really, really shown off by the scale of these gigantic deposits. And I was on a bike ride, and this was the 80s, and there's 100-year-old trees all around it tied up to it. And I couldn't figure out, did aliens drop this big pile of stuff, you know? and no, I finally figured it out, but it's worth a journey. So.
Can you go there?
Huh?
Can you go there?
Yes, you can go there.
Yeah.
You can go there. So you've got the GF&A train that's running from Georgia to Carabel. Then you have Panacea. And Panacea goes from Sopchoppy to Carabel by way of a tram. This went right up to the depot in Sopchoppy. It was an ox-drawn tram that went from Sopchoppy to Panacea to the Warm Mineral Springs. It ran for 15 years, and that's right up to the depot. And that house in the right-hand corner we'll be at shortly. That's the Ed Lawhon house. That's still there. It still exists. You can notice there's no forest anywhere. It's all forest now. So it was quite a thing to take the tram to the mineral springs. And then it was about the time it closed, there was an earthquake in Tallahassee. And there used to be a waterfall called the Cascades. Now it's Cascade Park. But there's no waterfall. And it was one of the reasons that the Tallahassee, the capital, was set there. It was because of that cascading waterfall. And the mineral springs had a big flow, and both were just in their heyday. The earthquake came and both stopped flowing and never started again.
What year was that, Robert? What year was that? More or less.
1910, 12, yeah. So that changed everything. Then the Cascade Park site became a toxic waste dump and sat for 70 years until they cleaned it and made it Cascade Park.
Does the current Gopher Frog and Alligator bike trail follow the path of the railroad?
It does, if we ever get that finished, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, part of it's done, but not all of it. We're hopeful. There was a motel at the Mineral Springs. It did very, very well. And this tramway was about the only sensible way to get to Panacea. The roads were absolutely horrible then.
Yeah, telephone.
And you can ride your bike. Remember, this is a wildlife corridor that has been open since the turn of the last century. So you see every type of game on it. And you can still ride the corridor on a bicycle or walk it because it is in the National Wildlife Refuge. And it's really worth it. It's a 7-mile trip. There's a motel. Kind of nice. It burnt, of course, as everything burnt back then. And here's one of the pools today. And they used to just be spraying out. There's still a little bit, it's a little bit sulfuric. And you can smell it, and it was then too. And it's still in private ownership. So there's talk of tying it up, and I'm pretty optimistic. Panacea tried to incorporate about 5 years ago, and they lost by 6 votes, and it broke everybody's heart. And so people kind of lost interest in a lot of things. They really wanted that opportunity to be a real city. All right, we're going back to the railroad now. in Sopchoppy. And this is Mr. Nelson Martin. Hey, Nelson
Hey.
Martin, where are we?
We are at the site of a train wreck. This 1926 Overland car. It was brand new, 1926, when it got hit by the GF&A train here near Gossett Mill. And 3 people were killed and 1 seriously injured. And the train carried him to the hospital faster than it had ever gone. And people had never seen the train move so fast, blowing its mournful whistle constantly. So this was the site.
So getting to the site, we had heard about the train wreck. It took us about a week to find the car. We're not worried about other people finding the car. And that's how we got there. And that was the better part of the trip. And we were covered in ticks, but we found it. We didn't know if it still existed, but we found it. So here we are 20 years later, and we got a federal iced tea grant, which is a grant available for non-motorized corridors or some historic structures. And one of the historic structure types was a depot. So it took close to 20 years of waiting. And most of the other people that had invested in holding on to the depot had died. So, you know, when you start getting into your 50s and 60s and things take 20 or 30 years, stuff happens. It's not good stuff. You know, it's for young people, but young people usually don't have the money. That's the restored depot. I don't know how many of you have been there. Anybody been to the depot? Okay, yeah. They did a really good job. So the guy that was talking about the car, Nelson, is the curator. And more than the curator, he is the one that did everything inside of the museum. It is his work of art, his life love, Sopchoppy and the museum. He was the one that started the GF&A Corporation and yelled out the holler, we've got to do this, we've got to do that. And people did. It was a big deal. All the pictures behind are all people that had ridden on the train. Worm grunting tools, naval stores and turpentine. It's a nice little place, given the size of Sopchoppy, to have something like that. This is a new exhibit. His brother had done it. It's on the different types of wood that are here and their properties. It's really, really nice. That just started about a month ago. So, a lot of pictures. So, if you were in Sopchoppy at the time of the train, it was the biggest city in Wakulla County. It had more commerce, it had auto dealership, it had a theater. It was the biggest place in the county, so it got the most attention right up till World War II. And so the WPA got involved with structure building because they were doing a lot with the state parks and others. So they showed up in Sopchoppy and they did in Spanish missionary style. They did both the original high school, because the main school, K-12 school for the county, was in Sopchoppy, and it's still there, and it's still in good shape. And they also did the gym, the same style. And the gym was fully restored about 15 years ago, and it's got a kitchen. It's very, very nice. And it hosts weddings and all sorts of things. But it's really a telltale of how ambitious Sopchoppy was from the turn of the century up to the early 40s. I don't know if you know much about range cattle. Well, this is probably the last pass-through anywhere where range cattle could get underneath the road. And that's in Sopchoppy. People think it's a culvert. No, it's a pass-through for range cattle when everybody had cows and they could just wander anywhere. So the city is kind of interesting. Even though it was small, there were some really visionary people, and one of those persons was Bill Stevens. He was probably 15 years older than me. He has since passed. He had an inkling in the early 70s to start a little water utility for 100 houses in Sopchoppy, which he did successfully. And he started buying up all these other tiny utilities through Sopchoppy. This is the city park. It's 35 acres. And this is 4th of July. They have a gigantic 4th of July celebration that's really worth seeing. And if you can go by boat, it's simply marvelous. The thing about Sopchoppy, and I have brought bicycle events through there with 1,000 riders that camp at the park. And what the riders say, the average age of those riders is about 60. And what they've said, I've done this twice, they said it's like going home to the 1950s. Because you know, your kids can play, there's no crime, you can swim in the swimming hole, this is the Sopchoppy River, and it's like it was when they grew up. Because the park is exactly a mile from downtown, so everybody was riding their bike and going to downtown, and we had food service and everything downtown for the riders. So we came up with, it's kind of like Mayberry, USA, and it's stuck. And when people ask me where do I live, I go, I live in Sopchoppy. It's 35 miles and 100 years southwest of Tallahassee. And that has stuck too. And so it's somewhat delightful at its ease of use and ease of living there. There's not a bad part of town. The river runs right through town, and there really is no crime. And it's kind of an anomaly of sorts. So after hanging out there for 30-some years, I've seen, up until the last 24 months, I've seen about 3 new homes built. In the last 24 months, I've seen 30. I've seen every lot in Sopchoppy get bought up. And I'm not saying this is a bad thing. I'm actually saying it's a good thing. So Sopchoppy is kind of unique. It is completely framed by the Apalachicola National Forest and the St. Mark's Wildlife Refuge. There's only so much land that you can grab and use. And the city commissioners have actually taken a good avenue, and they've passed some decent ordinances so certain horrible things can't happen. We did have one horrible thing happen is a Dollar General squeezed in. And that was what got everything else motivated and moving. So that did happen, but nothing else really bad. So we were at the depot a little while ago, and I said there was a house on the right, the Lawhon house. Well, this is a Lawhon house. And they were a rich family from Quincy that wanted to move near the railroad because he had a big investment in the railroad. And so he hired the builders from Quincy to come live here and build an exact house to the house that he had there. And so they were from the family of Coca-Cola money. So, and his son, this is great, so this is 1890s. His son, that was born right at 1900, lived to 2004 in that house and had full mind control and was a storyteller up till the day he died. And I'd done a lot of interviews with him on tape, which I can't find because they were so many years ago. But he was a character. He also worked in the depot, and they had one of the big grocery stores there. And that house still exists. There it is. It's locked away in there. And so one of my best friends has purchased it, and he owned, it was the whole block, and it was a downtown farm. And that's the one thing we haven't got to with restoration yet. But there's so many people, and we're all aging now. I'm 70, he's 74. We're just trying to find a good home with people that want to restore it and bring it back, because it's not leaking. It just, you know, it's going to take $500,000 to get it up and going. But it's absolutely a beautiful place. So that's one of the undone things. So this is there was a bank and pharmacy next to each other. And if you've been to Sopchoppy, there's a brewery there, Civic, and that's my son's. But we had restored it right at 2000, and it was Backwoods Pizza. So he took it over 3 years ago, almost 20 years to the day that we had opened. And this is what it looked like when we bought it. And it's on the right. They had bulldozers prepared to push it all over. And we grabbed it for pennies. And the other one was grabbed as a dental lab, and it was that for 20 years. And now it's going to be a restaurant, coffee shop within 6 months. And if you look to the right of the edge of that building, you can see the pharmacy, and we're standing on the depot, and this is about 1915 now. And that's the post office. It doesn't exist, there's a hardware store now. That's the second post office after the first one burnt. So here we go to the strangeness of you know, we knew all about history, everything was settled. Then we came across this map, and it was folded into a book. And this is just a shot of the map. It was kind of crusty. And it's a map of the basin of Sopchoppy. Sopchoppy's the upper left corner. That's a 1930s train. All the cow are free-roaming cow. But what had happened is two lodges. One of them is the Buckhorn Creek Lodge, and the other is the Breakaway Lodge. And Breakaway Lodge was where all the generals stayed during Camp Gordon Johnson. And the Buckhorn Creek Lodge was a lodge that was owned by Knee-High Soda Company out of Athens during Prohibition times, and is where you went to have fun. So this next story is so strange I don't even know how to say it. So I was told to go to this place and do a canoe trip. This is 32 years ago. And what it was where that lodge was. The lodge was burnt by the grandson for mortgage money. So it was just the leftovers. I knew nothing about the lodge. I knew nothing about anything. And it was my 10th wedding anniversary. So my wife and I did the paddle. We came back, and there was a for sale sign up. And it was put up while we were out paddling. No. And it was just like where I grew up on the Anclote River in Tarpon Springs. And I called the realtor and said, I'll give you what you're asking, boom, boom, boom. But what I didn't know when I did this, I knew nothing about the history, nothing about any of it, because it's surrounded by a wildlife refuge. The wildlife officers had been trying to buy that burnt lodge because it's on an acre on high ground, beautiful lot, for 10 years. And nobody would sell it, nobody would sell it, nobody would sell it. And instantly they find out it's sold because they've been watching it. And they call the FBI on me because they knew, they knew that I had to be part of the family to get this. Because not only did they do whiskey and everything through the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, his grandson offloaded shrimp boats from the dock of marijuana. So it was, and a lot of people in Sopchoppy got very, very wealthy because of this. And Jack Rudlow with Gulf Specimen wrote a book called Potluck.
Oh, I've read that. It's fabulous.
So Potluck was supposed to have been a nonfiction. And he gave the manuscript to the sheriff. And the sheriff said, if you publish this, you will get killed and we'll all go to jail. So we fictionalized it. And so I've been a friend of Jack's for a really, really long time. So I read Potluck and I said, there's my house. There's the story. So it's the whole story comes out. So anyway, so the FBI shows up. They get the whole deal from me. I never even met the guy and there wasn't anything. And then I end up friends with all the refuge people, even though they were horribly pissed off. Horribly pissed off. So the blue dot is where my place is, Buckhorn Creek Lodge, and the red marker is where Breakaway Lodge is. So it was a very quick trip to go between, it's about 5 miles, to go between the two and have lots of fun, but sneak back home to all your wives and just go back to sleep. So that's on the map what it looks like, Buckhorn Lodge. Go there, you see the hand? Hey, yeah, go to Buckhorn Lodge, don't forget. So this is, my house is exactly where the lodge was. I built on the same place, but I went up 3 stories. And just recently, because of another really weird event, I'm at a e-bike meeting over in Origins here last week, and the guy I'm sitting next to is Robbie Miller, and he's the guy that bought Breakaway Lodge. And we just started talking, and we found out that both of our lodges, all the azaleas and camellias, were provided by the Callaways from Callaway Gardens in the 1920s. All of them. So my whole property is completely surrounded by azaleas that are 100 years old. And that's the water in the boathouse down there. So before they were the Nehi Soda Company, they were the Sopchoppy Company, formed, it was 1902, and quickly Coca-Cola sued them, very quickly. And that's how they came Nehi. And then they were the very progressive, very, very progressive brand. So I've had the property 32 years, and I've been digging and wandering in the woods all around there. And I have found hundreds of bottles and 4 stills. And best I can figure, they were actually bottling whiskey in Nehi bottles. And then they had a small tugboat that I found sunk that they would distribute. So his parents and grandparents all used Buckhorn to send liquor out to sea, and the grandson used shrimp boats to bring pot into the dock. And I was completely ignorant about all of this. And there's Breakaway Lodge down at the bottom. There's a view. The only picture I had of Breakaway. It's up on a bluff on the Apalachicola. So in '36, it turned into refuge. And this is a cypress tree that has eaten the sign. And this has showed up in numerous magazines and everywhere. And when it finally falls, I will have it in my house. And these are the creatures that protect everything. There was a lot of naval stores and turpentine in the area. And after a fire, and if you know the history, they needed the gum for shipbuilding to keep the wood from leaking. And they also needed it for making turpentine, and they had another 100 uses for it. And it came in 10 different grades. And they were always innovating. And so only once have I come up on a turpentine camp after fire. These are Hurdy pots. They were patented in 1903, and it was the last device they used for gathering turpentine. And it was one of the easiest devices to get the turpentine out of. because they had a round bottom. You could heat them lightly and it would fall out, or you could just break the pot and they could make them on site. So this was a site with hundreds of pots. It was really, really cool.
Is that an alligator in the middle?
Huh?
Is that an alligator in the middle? Oh, it's
No.
an alligator. Stump.
So about every 40 years, Sopchoppy goes down. And what we didn't know, when it gets this low, it's full of alligator holes and fishing holes, but there's glaciated quartz in it, which means there's glacier stuff runoff in the bottom, which was cool. So I've only got to walk this one time. It's really, really cool. And it's a marvelous river. It's got steep banks, artesian wells. It's a great river to paddle. And the Florida National Scenic Trail is right alongside of it too. And there's what Jack's Cliff looks like, if you don't know. And then Tim Dorsey ends up in Sopchoppy during Worm Grunting Festival and writes a whole bunch. I'm not going to tell you what, but it's worth a read. All right. Now here comes the hard part. So about 8 years ago, I was leaving. I had given up. I said I had a house in Montana. I was buying it back and moving away from the South because I'd lost my mind. None of the projects that I could get going would go. And I just said, I'm selling the house and I'm moving away. And I really meant it this time. There was a third time this has happened. And about 2 weeks before I finalized everything, the Coastal Trail and the Wakulla Environmental Institute were funded. I was part of both of them, and I didn't sell. I stayed here, said I wasn't leaving, and one of my friends said, why don't you start hosting people as an Airbnb so you can be around different types of Aboriginal people? Because there was just, Sopchoppy is a hard place. And it's hard only because it's deep south. It's hard to get things done. People are afraid. And they're all good people, but progress is very, very hard earned. Plus there's 11 churches and 400 people, and it takes a lot of forgiveness to keep it running. So I started an Airbnb, and I said, I'm going to make this research-based. And I lived there too. So we were living there, we were hosting people from all over the world. And I ran up till COVID about 1,600 people through. And I queried everybody about why they came. I helped them find things to do. And the almost 7 years I did this, that I had it up to 40% of the people were international travelers. And they were very high quality, high value. They were here for a few reasons, but the main 2 reasons they came here, and this all worked by way of word of mouth to get it up to 40%, was the authenticity of the area. And this is why this is a scream out to you guys in Apalachicola about keeping your authenticity and knowing how to keep your authenticity. So even though it was poor South, even though there wasn't any money, it's incredibly authentic and real. And the second thing was its biodiversity. And there's few places like these 2 counties anywhere. Our county is 73%, you're about 85% locked up lands in state and federal management. This is along the Sopchoppy River. That's off one of the bridges on the Sopchoppy. And this played out. So what I kept doing is focusing more on, come stay with me, all these wild things and all this neat nature stuff to do. And the more I marketed that, the better the guests were to maintain and the easier they were. They weren't the drunks that came to drink a case of beer every night and a bottle of liquor, because now they knew there's alligators off the dock. Because I sold the place by telling people, oh, you want to bring your dog? Well, there's alligators, and the last $2 were eaten. Not true, but that came up with ways to kind of filter the groups. So I was just getting the people that just wanted to go play. And they were so easy to play with. So here's a couple that when I kept tweaking the site that reflected the best people I got. The people that really cared, the people that really wanted to know. And it turned out of here for 3 weeks, they were from a farm in Wisconsin. They were wonderful. He brought enough cheese with him to feed us for a whole year. And he was happy. He caught fish like this every day, right off the dock. And you know, it was like having a brother that I never met. But because he responded to my queries and the way it was set up exactly like it was. And there's some people that don't want to come because, you know, it's not 30A. It's the backwoods, and you know, it's full of ticks, it's full of snakes, and I'm going to tell you about it. And if you don't like them, don't come. And so that's kind of how it ended up. And now we go to
the casual passerby through Sopchoppy, Florida, watching Jim Rozier at his daily occupation, would surely think he'd taken leave of his senses. But no, he's just doing what a lot of people do around Sopchoppy, grunting for worms. Jim Rozier's skill with a piece of iron and a hardwood stub sets up a vibration in the earth that Sopchoppy earthworms find extremely disagreeable. To escape it, they pop to the surface, there to become fish bait. What's the stub made out of?
Well, it's made out of sweet gum I got here, and most people use hickory.
It has to be either sweet gum or hickory.
Right.
And what's the iron that you're using?
Well, it's come out of old car spring. It's an old piece of old car spring, regular car spring.
Can people actually make a living at this?
I do.
It turns out that dozens of people make a living at it around here, and it's not a bad living. A couple $100 a week is not an unusual income for this unusual occupation. It's the early bird who gets the worm, as we all know, so the hours just after dawn are worm grunting time in Sopchoppy. In neighboring counties of the Florida Panhandle, this is known also as worm fiddling or worm scrubbing, and it is thought that square stobs or triangular stobs work best. Sopchoppy is contemptuous of these deviations from the round stob and truck spring, which pay off here to the tune of more than 30 million earthworms a year. We spent a long morning in the woods, and we'd never have believed it if we hadn't seen it. A couple minutes' work by an experienced worm grunter might yield as many as 50 or 60 worms in a 30-foot circle, then on to another spot. 500 worms to the can, and the cans fill up fast. By 11 o'clock in the morning, people are reassembling at trucks scattered all through these woods. And by noon, the trucks are rolling into Myron Hodge's bait store, where Mr. Hodge pays $6.25 a can. He repackages the product in paper bags full of sawdust, and every morning he fills a lot of paper bags. Within 24 hours, at smaller bait stores all over the South, these worms will be enticing fishermen. And shortly thereafter, they'll be enticing bass. It's big business.
Well, I guess yearly business would be, in this area, it would be about $250,000 business a year.
Really? That much?
In this Sopchoppy community. Of course, the other county, I don't have that many, but me and the other dealers together.
That's really something. Why do people go out in the woods to grunt worms? Why not just grow them in their backyards?
Well, they can't grow this type worm. This worm is only grow in the wild, in the woods.
Therefore, do not scoff at worm grunting. After all, you probably thought that the way to get worms is to go out in the woods with a shovel. Ha! Shovels are for kids and amateurs, and others who have not mastered the truck spring, the black gum stub, and the sensitive touch. Charles Kuralt, CBS News, on the road in Sopchoppy, Florida.
within 10 days the IRS was at its Within 3 months, there was a permit to do worm grunting in the national parks. This was the turning point for Sopchoppy. This was the turning point. So, this was now 25 years ago. A group of us knew of this, and we're brainstorming, and this is what the Worm Grunting Festival grew out of. And it's 21 years old now. And the first year we had it, we sent out a video news release to 50 different stations within 200 miles, and we had 5,000 people. We sold 1,000 t-shirts in 2 hours. First festival. People, and it has never, ever stopped. Everyone has just yielded wonder. And what it was, and this was a turning point for the town, because everybody wanted to bulldoze all the buildings. Everybody wanted new. And we started the festival, and all the older people and all the families started to remember these times. And they celebrated it. And it was about the cultural heritage. And we got all this press, and these wonderful people show up here, and Scientific America, Field and Stream, Dirty Jobs. Everybody's showing up. And now they're starting to think, maybe there's something good. I'm serious. It's just amazing what happened. And so this is all the kids doing Worm Brothers Field. We got some killer people in Sopchoppy. You've got killer people in Apalachicola. But you just have to be diligent and keep working hard. These are folks that showed up from South Florida. They heard about Sopchoppy, and they made all these incredible maps of the area in Apalachicola County. And they sold out. This was during the festival. They get it, you know, they got it. And this is the queen of worms. And that is our mayor, Laura. And she was the queen this year, and boy, she pulled it off well at the park that she helped to make happen. And she's a brilliant lady. Couldn't have a better person. So then we'll jump back. Somebody mentioned the GFNA Trail. Well, the GFNA got pulled into the Capital City to Sea trails and the Capital City to Sea loop. And Sopchoppy is the left bottom corner. And I was told by local people that the trail would come to Sopchoppy over my dead body. And there was a number of them, and they're all dead now. And they did get their way. But the leftovers of that family that were objectionable to it were the first people to build an RV park, bike shop, and it's under construction now, to take advantage of the trail. So when people ask me, what does Sopchoppy mean? I say, irony. It just means irony. And then I explain it. So this is part of the proposal for the trail that story shows up. Remember, facilities are nothing without destinations. Everything's about destinations. And we've got the destinations and that will be a destination along the trail. And part of it's built along Spring Hill Road. It's all in the planning stages. It'll get built. I may be dead, but it'll get built. So things that spawn, everything spawns. So we have a wonderful native plant park in Sopchoppy, and then some younger people spawn the second Saturday of every month. People come and bring food, bring everything, and it's marvelous. Tennessee started after this, and it's a different day, but it's just, you get to meet people. They have eggs, they have fresh breads. It's very, very, very cool. So now I'm going to take you to what I call the champions. And these are people that gave everything for their mission. And you know, you can't have a city be a champion, you have to have a person. And that person will figure out workarounds, they'll figure out everything, but they will never, ever give up. That's Nelson Martin. He's still alive too, but he was the one that started the GFNA Corporation. He was the one that had the vision for the depot. He never gave up, and it took 30 years. He never gave up. And he's a curator, did the whole thing. Brilliant person. Moved down here from Baltimore in 1970, and lived in a thatched hut along the Sopchoppy for 10 years. He raised the thatched hut, built a second floor, and didn't put a metal roof on it until 10 years in. He was living under a thatched hut. And he had one of the most crazy cool homes anywhere. My heart goes out to him. And that's now Liz Carter, 83 years old. She's a paddler, and don't say kayaker. She paddles canoes, and she knows her stuff, and her husband Bush. They got wind to turn Sopchoppy into what it was and let people know into a trail town. There's a statewide trail town designation. And the map's about finished. About next month, it'll be official, and we will be an official one of, I believe, 10 trail towns in Florida. And these are aquatic trails, horse trails, walking trails, bicycle trails, and we got the blessing of the city, which 20 years ago, the city wanted us to go away. It wasn't, they tried to stop the Worm Grunting Festival for 5 years, but we held it on private property. It wasn't a good relationship for a long time, because the South is hard to win over. This is Laura Edwards and her husband. And she's a dynamo. Her husband is a county administrator, and he's 6th generation Sopchoppy. So he had been a big help too on saying, here's what's really going on. Here's the real problems. And there's lots of stories about lots of problems, but essentially every problem has found a workaround. And pretty amazing. This is Winky Rice. Anybody been to Backwoods Crossing?
Yes.
Anybody know of the new Panacea restaurant?
Yeah.
Tried it? That's all of her kids. Both her children that are Trident and Backwoods, I'm waiting for that story. That's Dave. He's a retired ER doc, and he got it in his head that he wanted to get the 11 churches all talking to each other. 4 of the 11 churches are black churches, and the black and white churches really never got along. And so what he does every week, he has a community dinner. Everybody is welcome, and different churches host it every week. And he's been working this for a year now, and he's really getting somewhere. In an impossible place, and about 50 people show up once a week, and they share stories and share time. This is inside that building.
It's 5 after 5.
Okay. This is inside of the building, and we moved the building from Crawfordville. There were bulldozers chasing it down, and the whole building was made out of railroad boxcar siding, because there was a Heart of Pine sawmill in South Georgia, and it was the cheapest way to build. And so what we did when we moved it, the dog trot was the center, it was 10 foot, we made it 30. This is my Summit Civic Brewery, and that's the 2 boys from Trident and Backwoods, and that's my son, and they've been best buds forever. And so what happened was, when we closed the restaurant, because of a war with the city over beer and wine license, we leased it to their family, and that's where they started. This is the bank building with Lulu and Joey next to the Civic Brewery, and they're opening the bakery food shop. This is the plant society that maintains the garden. We've got Crazy George the potter. He's always worth visiting. We've got the scenic byway now that you're part of and we're part of, which is a big deal. We've got Airbnbs, and we've got one last story. So we opened up in 2000 with Sopchoppy Outfitters and Backwoods Pizza. We ran it for 4 years, asked with no problems, and we asked for a beer and wine license. And we worked with the city for a year. We went to the final meeting, and they had set it up so we wouldn't get the license. And at that point, I felt like a black person in 1950s America. And I left the city hall emotionally distraught, and a voice spoke to me, grab the sign and go back in. So I grabbed the open sign, I went back to City Hall to say, you just closed us because of your conniving. And the guy that ran the water utility keeps the door locked, he opened it. But what I didn't know is somebody in the crowd of about 75 people had hollered, he's got a gun. Because they saw how I was treated, and he thought I went out to my car and got a rifle, and I was coming back to kill everybody. No, this is not funny. This is not funny. And I opened the door, and people were flying out one door to the back of the building. They were flying so fast, 2 of them tried to go through the drywall because they couldn't all get out the door, and they got tangled in the electrical wires. And so I'm standing there, and I'm saying, what is going on? And the editor, Bill Snowden of the newspaper, said to me, somebody hollered you had a gun. And I thought of the fear and of the guilt and of whoever pooped their pants because you could smell it. It was probably a preacher. And I started laughing. And I uncontrolled the laughter. We boarded up the whole restaurant that night with plywood, and the next day people started posting notes with a stapler on how much they hated the city. And 1,000 things went up over 2 years when we were closed. And I was done. At that point, I was done with forever. And that was the first time I almost moved away. And then it was the Rice Boys that said, can we lease the building? They did. They got the beer and wine license. And then they ran it up until my crazy son came back and said he wanted to do a brewery. So here comes my crazy son, fresh out of the military. He wants to do a brewery in the town that wouldn't give us a beer and wine license. And he did it. And the fireworks associated with that were spectacular. And I shot it all for a documentary. And he did a great job. Everybody's happy. The city gets along with him. There's no issues. And he essentially erased all my bad feelings. And I owe him big time for that. So that's the story of Sopchoppy. And those are the boys that did it. Those 3. Took another generation. It wasn't conquered till the 2nd generation.
Thank you, Robert.
So for 2 months, everywhere I went in the county, that story ran on the front page of the paper about the gun. For 2 months, everywhere I went, people ducked and hid from me. My stomach hurt for weeks because I laughed so much. I hope you enjoy it.
How's things going on? Oh, pretty good.